Tuesday, September 26th, 7 p.m. And this is the Norfolk Master Plan Steering Committee meeting. We'll open it up. We don't have everyone here, but we do have quite a few people from the planning board and the steering committee. So I will open it up and then pass it over to Josh.
Thank you very much, Chad. And good evening, everyone. Good evening, Master Plan Steering Committee, and good evening to MAPC staff who are joining us as well. So we have an exciting meeting for you all this evening. I think this is a sort of turning and pivot point of sorts, and we're really pushing into the next phase of our work together on the Norfolk Master Plan. We have our full team with us this evening because we view this more as a work session with you all, and hopefully you come with that spirit and energy. I'll give you a notice right now so you can mentally prepare yourself as we give you a little bit of an intro presentation. But really, we'd like you to engage with us around the initial draft topic goals this evening, and to help us with some jam boards that will give you the opportunity to give us some feedback live as we go through those topic by topic. So let me show you the agenda real quick. We'll give you a brief rundown of where we're at before we get to that interactive exercise, but we hope to get there in pretty short order and be able to devote the majority of our meeting to those conversations. We're planning to give each topic around 10 minutes and then go through those topic by topic. And we have 8 topics, so that's why we want to get to that pretty quickly. The committee, as you see on the screen, you all know each other well now. Hopefully, people who are viewing this as a recording or viewing us from the general town participation also recognize these names now. These are devoted residents of various boards and committees and just residents at large who are a part of guiding our work and have been very excellent stewards of this process so far. Our staff, you're also getting very familiar with at this point, and you see many of the faces in the slide on the screen tonight, and each one will walk you through the initial topic goals as we get to that point. So we're glad to have our team out with us this evening. Wanted to highlight for you all that you have received in your email as part of the preparations for this meeting, what we're calling the existing conditions brief. And it's about a 100-page document which goes through each of the topics, background data, some of the process to date, an overview of what a master plan is. And we gave that to the committee members as a preview first to see if you have any initial reactions or thoughts, but then we'll in short order be putting that up on the master plan website and make that a more public-facing document. So if members of the public are interested in it, they can grab and take a look at that as well. We suggest and ask you, if you do have a certain area you want to hone in on or some thoughts or questions, try to send those along to us in the next 2 weeks or so by October 6th, and then we'll get that up on the project website. You, of course, can take more time with the document if you would like, and it's considered kind of a working draft all the way through until it gets finalized with the master plan later in the spring of 2024. I would describe it as an interim product. It does not necessarily represent anything that there will be repeated parts of it, of course, that show up in the final master plan document, but don't consider this like an initial draft of the master plan in any way or anything like that. It's really an interim product which shows you the existing conditions for each topic, some of the summaries in terms of community engagement, and the process and results of the initial work around the draft vision statement. So all of that work is in the hard work we've done in phase 1, reflected in this document, and it sets a very firm foundation for the goals work, which we'll be presenting to you initially this evening for the first round of feedback. Any questions about this document? All right, so we'll move right along.
Josh, I got a question for you. Sorry, it's Aaron.
Yes, Aaron.
You mentioned that you circulated this to the committee members?
Via email with the meeting agenda, I believe it was.
I did not get it, so let's...
Okay. I will do a separate follow-up email that has a subject line of existing conditions brief and send that around to the committee just to make sure you all have it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we wanted to, before we get into each of the topics, just give you a little background on the process for the goal setting. So we're shifting in this very simplified diagram of this complicated process from highlighting issues now more to identifying solutions. The initial coupling of challenges and solutions is through the goals, and the goals again are at the highest level. You'll see that in the next diagram. But we're really at that central feature. This is a very important part of setting the content of the master plan. So this is a conversation which will begin with you all this evening. This is a conversation that will then expand to the broader community, and we'll show you some ways that will be happening. Gloria will walk us through fall engagement a little bit next. And then we'll be trying to set these over the next couple months a little bit firmer as more finalized goals, and then start working underneath those finalized goals to provide a roadmap for how to actually achieve those goals. And that roadmap will include strategies and actions underneath each goal. Each topic has goals associated with it, and then each goal will have strategies associated with that. So you can see here the topics in the vision statement. The vision statement is drafted. That gives us an advantage in that we're crafting goals which are hopefully building toward that vision of Norfolk and responsive to it, and then adding more detail to the language that's in the vision statement as well. We've had the opportunity to have an internal work session where each of the topic leads have produced the initial goals, which they'll present to you this evening. And then we compared those initial goals across topics and had a conversation about it all, had some suggestions for each other, how to refine and improve the goals. We've been tracking each of the goals in terms of their origins. So whether those goals came directly from community feedback that we heard at a workshop or through the community survey, which received over 1,000 participants responding to it, or through the existing conditions data, which is squarely represented in that existing conditions brief I just talked about, or if it's from neither of those categories, but something as professional planners that we know about in our fields of expertise regarding a best practice or an emerging practice that should be on the town's radar. So that's where these goals are coming from. The majority, or I guess the largest of those three categories is appropriately from community feedback. So a lot of the goals are coming directly from things we've heard from the community. Next is looking at the existing conditions and data and being responsive to what we're seeing in the data. And then the last and least of those categories, I think also appropriately, is the best in emerging practice. So this is the initial goals are coming from the community, either from the suggestions and themes and patterns that we've heard from residents, or from those same suggestions, themes, and patterns that we see in data. So I'm going to pass it to Gloria. This is our last of the initial presentations before we get into the interactive goal setting. And Gloria's going to walk us through our approach to engaging the broader community around the initial goals and what the fall might look like in that regard.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. So keep all of that information about how we set up these goals in mind, because that'll be sort of helpful as you think about our interactive activity for the rest of the session. But just to think about outreach briefly, we learned a lot from the first phase of engagement and outreach that we've done about sort of what works for the Norfolk community, what doesn't, and really focused on creating that shared community vision. And as we shift into the next phase of the project and of engagement, really shifting from focusing on the vision statement to these goals that we're going to talk about today, tweaking the timeline a little bit, and also just wanted to highlight for you all a few pieces of the engagement methods that we're proposing. We tweak and shift a little based on what we've learned from that first phase. So on the next slide, a few highlights to share with you all. So again, we're moving into this phase of looking at these draft goals and preparing those initial draft goals. through this conversation tonight. And we're hoping to provide sort of an online engagement mechanism that community members will be able to use to give us their feedback and input on those draft goals, sort of on their own time at their own pace. We'll also then develop sort of a roadshow where we bring the progress that we've made so far on the master plan, the goals, these initial draft goals that we work on, to the different boards and committees in town, from the select board to the advisory committee, conservation commission, et cetera. And then lastly, we wanted to discuss with you all how to best sort of get that broader community feedback on these initial draft goals, recognizing that a lot of the pop-up type events that we did in the previous phase this spring, summer really worked well. So going on to the next page, and we have a bit of an updated timeline where you can see we're starting to think about, across the bottom there, we have the Norfolk Small Business Association, Council on Aging, other pop-up events, going back to those organizations that we and groups that we touched base with in the first phase of engagement and following up with them, but open to hearing from you all any other pop-up events we should be tabling at or having meetings with or attending. We know the Santa Parade came up back when we first started working with y'all and getting to know what could work in terms of the engagement for this process. And you'll see that we have a few other phases of getting feedback, again, on goals and then moving into strategies as we get into the winter. With that said, I think we also just wanted to highlight what we heard from community members about how they want to engage as we move into this next phase. So 80% of folks who answered that survey that we put out said that they hadn't participated in the master plan process prior to the surveys. And that's really re-emphasized by this next point that over 40% of folks said that virtual participation was their preferred method, with 56% of folks saying they heard about the survey through Facebook. So these are definitely some channels we'll want to continue using. And then lastly, we also just wanted to note that there are some groups that have been underrepresented in the process so far: renters, residents of color, people who work in Norfolk, residents with lower incomes, and people under the age of 35. Of course, we recognize that these folks are sort of smaller parts of the population in Norfolk, but as we move into this next phase of engagement, we're also thinking about how do we make sure we hear sort of appropriately from these various residents. So I'll pause there, open to any questions or initial ideas that come up in terms of our next phase of engagement. But I think more to come on this piece as we refine those initial draft goals.
And I'll add too, a thank you to those of you who were able to attend the Norfolk Community Day back at the beginning of the month and have a presence for the master plan there. I think as we enter this next phase of feedback that Gloria just laid out, it will likely be useful and appropriate for us to be at those similar types of events as they show up on the calendar. So as much as you can look out for those and make us aware of them a little bit in advance, I think this phase lends itself well to what we did in the very first phase of the work, where we had a project business card with the QR code and can do that so that people can link directly to the feedback tool that they'll be using to provide us feedback on initial goals. So that this, I think, is a more engaging and fruitful period where we have a more tangible ask for people to give us feedback on something, as opposed to just making them aware of the process in general. Aaron, yes.
Two thoughts. well, I still call it the haunted train ride, but I think it's now the haunted car ride is coming up at Halloween time. It's always a big gathering of folks at Freeman Kennedy. I believe it's still at Freeman Kennedy. And then a question for Gloria, that the last slide that was up with the underrepresented communities the question is, in the existing condition primer, do we identify what percentage of the population these folks are?
Yeah, we've pulled that data back at the very beginning of the process. I think you might remember in our previous steering committee meetings, we've had a few slides that show sort of the demographic data of the town. So it's something that we didn't put the numbers up here, but have on the back end and have been making some comparisons of who we've actually reached versus the demographics as we know them of the town.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question.
One thing I did want to mention about in terms of awareness was I need to speak to Susan Jacobson. I know we did a mailer from the housing production plan. I want to evaluate possibly of doing a postcard to send to households to make them aware of the master plan. Because I've had people pop into town hall, and the more traditional method of getting things in the mail and that kind of thing, they said, we didn't get anything in the mail. So I'm evaluating that as maybe another mechanism to create awareness of the master plan for people per household. And then as we move forward, there'll be some other points we're going to want to get their feedback as we go through the master plan to maybe have, non-web-based options for them too, to participate for those that don't necessarily traditionally participate that way.
Yeah, I think definitely balancing those preferences for virtual engagement with the methods that we know work for, especially folks on this list. Of course, seniors, we had a lot of different input from in terms of how they would like to engage. So appreciate that idea, Rich, about the mailers. Aaron, I'm seeing you're raising your hand. Is that from before or a new?
Nope, I'm back again.
Great.
Feeling interactive tonight. I thought on the people under the age of 35, Norfolk Town Soccer is happening this season. I'm not sure if the games are Saturday or Sunday, but it's one of the two. And it's usually the younger kids, which would make me think they're the younger parents. So might be worth spending a day or a morning or an afternoon over at the Pond Street Fields to talk to those folks. Awesome.
Yep, I know baseball opening day was a big hit for us in terms of passing out those business cards. So a parallel in the fall, winter. Sounds like it would be great. Well, for the sake of time, maybe I'll turn it back over to Josh to take us into the interactive goals discussion portion. But as always, feel free to reach out if y'all have any ideas for the engagement process.
Great. Thank you, Gloria. And I do think we have an exciting fall lined up for us in terms of the way that we're engaging and responding to the feedback we've heard. And I think that at the point we are in the process, it will be important for us to meet with some other boards and committees and make them aware of the progress and the ability to weigh in on goals. And also to, as we go in front of those various boards and committees, each of those boards and committees have their own built-in audience of residents that typically tune in. And so hopefully we'll reach a little bit of a different audience in that way too. And those who regularly attend select board or advisory committee or conservation commission meeting will be exposed to the master plan as we do that. So just to get to the next steps, because I know after this next round of interaction on the jam boards, we'll all just want to be done once we hit the final topic. Here are some more tangible next steps. We did want to bring up the thought that Again, reiterating, providing feedback to the existing conditions document, which we will resend to the committee after this meeting, just to make sure you all have it with a separate email. If you do provide feedback by the 6th, then we'll try to get that integrated into the document prior to its public posting. If not, you can provide us feedback after that, but we'll just put it into a working document instead of the one that's posted publicly at the moment. The question mark we have about next month is whether or not a steering committee meeting is required, given the fact that the main content that we're developing and focusing on right now is what we're reviewing this evening, the initial draft goals. And then in the next month, we'll be focused on expanding that outreach through meeting with other boards and committees and putting it up online for broader community consumption. And then some of the ways Rich just talked about, exploring those more analog approaches as well. The committee meeting next month, therefore, we might not have as much to talk about, and it might be more useful for you all to use that time to take another look at draft goals to see if you have additional thoughts or comments, or to look at the existing conditions brief. And then we could reconvene in November, when I think there would be more for us to move on and talk about as the process has advanced. I just throw that out there. If we do really want to meet in October, we're open to that too, but could give you a break. And then really the focus of our work, we've already gone through in pretty good detail, but that's focused on sharing those initial draft goals through all the channels and audiences that we've talked about. Any thoughts on October meeting?
Josh, I mean, I think what you're saying there is fine. I mean, it probably makes the most sense to skip that October meeting. And as long as we get everything into you by the Friday the 6th, we could skip the October and then just regroup in November.
And of course, if circumstances change and something's happened and there's a reason for us to meet, then of course we could figure that out and meet. But perhaps for now, we'll just consider it. Our next meeting will likely land in November unless we decide otherwise for good reason.
I did mention to Josh that the October 10th meeting will be the Southwood presentation that you've allocated time for. And then I also let him know that you adjusted your November meeting schedule, regular planning board meeting, to November 6th because of town meeting being November 14th. So that might serve as you might be able to go back in November to do both master plan and regular business as a potential option.
Yeah, I think that's possible. It's likely, even with the skipped month in terms of meeting, that the November meeting will be also a lighter agenda meeting for the master plan committee. So it could likely fit with the planning board agenda like we had previously done over the spring. The meeting tonight really is the big lift, getting through the next topics with you in our next phase of this meeting. All right. So without further delay, again, we're compiling all of this information on the master plan website, which is on the screen, mapc.ma/Norfolk 2035. And you can sign up, anyone wants to, for the email list if you're not already. And we will, reminds me, and just to put the note out there for Gloria and ourselves and for everyone, that we are in due time for a mass email update to the people who have signed up for our email updates. And we have, I think, really good progress to report. So we will prepare a mass email update to that list and use that as another one of the channels that we're engaging with people who had previously been engaged with this process. So here's what we have assembled you all for this evening, which is to talk about the initial draft goals by topic. The way that we're going to proceed with this is to have a brief presentation by the topic leads, which I'll start off with as the topic lead for land use and zoning. And then we'll go through topic by topic. We'll give an elevator pitch of sorts from the topic leads just to let you know about the challenges that we're trying to respond to, and then walk you through the goals a little bit on a Jamboard. We will unshare the presentation we've been using so far and share the Jamboard onto the screen so people can see that live. But we invite you, if you're at a computer, to also open up the Jamboard link so you can actually use your own Post-it notes to make comments or add questions or thoughts live on there, as if they're, virtual Post-its and stickies. It's pretty self-explanatory, but we can help you all if you have questions as we start to do that. The idea here is that we're helping you all get engaged with the draft goals, both to understand what they are, but also crowdsourcing from you all an initial reaction to them so we can get them strengthened as quickly as possible. We'll integrate your feedback from tonight before we start circulating them more broadly. A few housekeeping items as we've gotten to this point in the work. We have just made a sort of naming shift to refer to public health as a topic to community health. We think that's more accessible and has less baggage related to the pandemic than the phrase public health does. So I think community health is a more appropriate phrase and better for people. The other is that sustainability and energy have been out there a little bit as whether in our minds, maybe it wasn't as clear, we weren't very explicit about it, whether it's a standalone topic or an integrated topic with some of the others. I think at this point, with the goals assembled initially, it looks a little better to combine sustainability with both open space and recreation and energy with community facilities and services. We think that is a little more robust way to assemble the topics. And so you'll see that shift as we move forward as well. So let's just dive right in. We're at about 7:30. So if we give ourselves a little bit around an hour, that'll give us 9-ish or so minutes per topic. So for land use, we heard a lot from people about concern for the type of growth and development that's occurring in the community, both the scale, the locations, and the public services and infrastructure that will keep pace with that growth. And to be strategic, not to necessarily be opposed to growth, but be strategic about growth in the future. That 40B, which circumvents the town's local controls, will continue to occur and is outside the town's control and would be therefore less strategic from the town's perspective than other types of growth. And so getting 40B managed and under control is a priority, and that will show up in housing as well. That lower density single family homes present a longer term challenge in terms of infrastructure efficiency and the care and stewardship and cost of that infrastructure over time. And so that's a note more from the data side of things. And that there are barriers to certain types of development, which you all know well on the planning board and others, of course, with the limitations around wastewater in the town center and the limitations in terms of the development that can occur. So that's the character of the challenges that we're addressing. The Jamboard, if you want to just grab this link real quick, I don't think you can click on it on your screen necessarily, but if you just type it in, is the mapc.ma/Norfolk goals, and it will be the same Jamboard for all topics. So you can get to that once, and I'll get there too myself right now and share that. And then once you get in there, I'll give you a little bit of a preview of what you're seeing. So you should be able to see on my screen now also the Jamboard setup. So first, it's just an introductory slide that this is our goal setting session. And then there's a bit of a legend. So the categories of goals, which we described for you earlier, whether their origins are from community feedback, existing conditions data, or best and emerging practices, are those three color-coded ideas for the existing or for the goals that are proposed, the initial goals. And then if you wouldn't mind, if you have a question, try to use the pink Post-it notes. You can just copy it. You can click on it and say duplicate. And if you have new goal ideas, use the yellow one. So if you go over to slide 3, if you're in there, that's the land use slide. And this So you see up in the corner are questions and new goals. So you can click on those and say duplicate, and it will create a new one for you that you can type your idea on. And then here's the legend that we've been describing. So within land use, really focused on those issues and challenges we just mentioned. So supporting stability and incremental improvement at the Route 115, 1A commercial center, continuing to encourage community activity development infrastructure and investment in the town center, which has been a priority of the previous master plan as well. Strengthen clusters of dense walkable areas that can be connected by a multimodal network, which connects to housing and transportation goals. Balancing the small town feel of Norfolk with a desire for more services and amenities by strategically locating new residential and commercial growth in existing centers. So not having a sprawling future development, but more of a compact densification. Pursue long-term partnership and stewardship of state-owned lands and resources in Norfolk, whether those be Charles River flood areas or state prison lands, but just being mindful of those lands and their future plans. Encourage growth, commercial growth to increase local services, amenities, and reduce tax burden on individual property owners. And then continuing to modernize zoning to ensure regulations promote town goals and address modern challenges such as impacts of climate change and fossil fuel reduction. So you can see 3 of those are from community feedback directly, those related to the character and type of growth and the reduction of tax burden on single-family residents. 3 of them are from the existing data, that data either being existing in previous planning documents or demographic or land use data. And then the one about the zoning regulations, climate change, and fossil fuel reduction is, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. 3 are from existing best practices and emerging practices. And then the one about climate change is from the existing conditions and data as well. So with that brief intro, and you're welcome to also give us verbal comments, and we can put some of that onto the board ourselves, however is easiest for you to respond to this. I know it's a bit of a flood of information, but we invite you to react and respond. Joe's given us a thumbs up. Nice. And if it does look good, yeah, it's good feedback too. If it does generally look like a solid starting point, of course, these are a starting point, and this will be the basis by which we're building additional community engagement and community feedback to strengthen these from their perspective, the town's perspective at large. I'll enter a period of awkward silence while you all think and or comment.
So this kind of aligns with what we hear routinely. Like historically, if you sit on any board in Norfolk and ask what people think about the town, and then what we've kind of uncovered during like community day and things like that, just getting feedback. These are the big ones. I mean, we could probably go deeper into, or we could actually go wider in breadth as to various other things that people want. But I think keeping it focused on the core things is probably more valuable than just trying to spread too thin. Just my opinion.
Josh, it's Aaron again. What's the goal here? Are we just looking at the land use pages? Are we looking at the other pages? Are we supposed to comment on whether we think these are the right subjects for these categories?
Thanks, Aaron. Right now, we're focused just on land use, and then the procedure that we're going to go through over the next hour or so is that each of our topic leads are going to give you a similar introduction to the topic, the goals initially within their topic, and then you'll have the opportunity to consider those goals and react to them. I think the types of feedback we're looking for is if the language of a certain goal is unclear what it is we're intending to mean, then that's good. We'll take another look at the language. If you have a goal that's not addressed that you think should probably be within that topic, that's a good suggestion, and we'll take a look at that. Or if you have suggestions on wordsmithing or reframing, any of that type of feedback is very helpful.
All right.
And
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, let's start with the first one there, right? Support stability and incremental improvement at Route 115 1A Commercial Center. I'm not sure that sentence is going to resonate with the general public. I'm not sure I have a better solution. Well, commercial center, I don't know that anybody refers to it as a commercial center. I think what we're trying to say is that the commercial areas near 115 and 1A need to be incrementally, well, oddly, I suppose, developed. And I don't know what the right words are, but I think semantically there's a few confusing words in there. Commercial center is confusing. Not sure what stability means. I guess I get what incremental improvement means.
Great. That's very helpful. We'll take a look at that one.
Yeah, I think in planning board, we just refer to it, as the commercial center. I don't think we use those words, but we talk about it as the commercial district because it's C1, C3. But yeah, it doesn't really resonate with the average resident, I don't think. And I think stability is you just see a lot of in and out with those plots, and people always moving their businesses. So maybe there's a better way to word that one.
I'm wondering too, I think diagrams help a lot rather than just words too. So I don't know if this is going to evolve into, I know this is a bit of a sticky note exercise here, but if, maybe if the commercial center, as it's noted, was diagrammed or key planned or something, it would be helpful.
Great. Well, to keep us, I think you all kind of know the drill now, and I'll do a last call on land use because we do want to keep it moving along. And then we'll move into the next topic. And of course, I would view this as an introduction, and the invitation is, if you all wouldn't mind, to think about this or maybe even revisit the Jamboard. It will be available to you. And provide us comments. Feel free to email them or put them in the Jamboard. We'll check back on it. So with that, let's go ahead and I will switch back to the presentation real quick, and we'll shift to the next topic, which I believe is economic development. And it is. And that's Gurdeep.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gurdeep Kaur. I'm the Senior Economic Development Planner here at MAPC. This is an overview of some of the needs that were voiced both in the survey, in the community forum, and in the small business forum that we held, as well as this is also what came up in the existing conditions review. So just going to go through the list here. So we noticed there that a lot of Norfolk residents have very long commute times, and there's a general mismatch as there is a gap of well-paying jobs located in the city. There is also a need for more amenities and services, as some residents noted that they would like to frequent more locally owned smaller businesses, which then also takes us to a lack of diverse sources for revenue for the city, as the majority of the land in the city is zoned residential, which places tax burdens on homeowners. And a few of the other items mentioned was the lack of a sewage system, which poses a barrier for economic growth and development. And also meeting with the Small Business Association was very valuable, as we got to hear a lot of what we could do to address some of these issues. So going back over to the Jamboard, from these items, we came up with a few goals. If you guys are on that page now. And again, going back to the color coding system. So the blue sticky Post-its is in response to what we received from community feedback. The lime green is based on existing conditions data, and then the orange is best practices. I'll give everybody a few minutes to absorb these. You'll notice that a lot of the themes are also reflected in land use, such as prioritizing smart incremental development of the town center and the commuter rail hub as a business district, and diversifying the tax base, facilitating new right-sized commercial development that supports diversity of small landlords and small developers.
Do you guys not want me putting sticky notes all over the place? Or is that the
Yes.
point?
This is great.
All right.
So I welcome your feedback either via the sticky notes, or feel free to just unmute yourselves and I could take notes here.
Just one thought. I'm not doing the sticky note thing like Aaron is, but the middle one there, the existing condition with consider adaptive reuse of underutilized town-owned facilities and historic resources for use by local small businesses. There's not a ton of that, and even though there's not a ton of that, I don't think a lot of residents understand what that outlay is like. I don't think that most people would understand what the options to throw in there. And again, there's not a lot of options, but the amount of people that don't know that Old Town Hall is Old Town Hall and then it's still owned by the town is kind of funny when people are like, hey, somebody should get that landowner to tear down that house they just boarded up. Yeah, it's the town. So like when we think through economic development, stuff like this, back to the previous conversation we had about maybe having a map for land use stuff, it might help to have an illustration or a guide or some sort of material to help the average resident to understand what exactly we're talking about. Because once you map that, right, like once you make that connection, they'll understand it, but I don't think that connection is going to be apparent or immediate.
Saw a question pop up about what types of businesses residents seek. So one of the things also in the research is just where residents are spending their money, where they're going shopping, where they're going out to eat. So residents voice that they do not want big box stores. And so that's where the right-sized commercial development comes in, finding and supporting local businesses. The small landlords and small developers also plays into that to have the kind of development that residents desire. And this also comes from the Small Business Forum about how to support small businesses and what types of relationships they have with their landlords and what types of landlords are supportive of their businesses and which ones may not contribute to their growth.
I forgot what the template word was for the pink.
All right. So it looks like activity is starting to slow down. I have to admit, I'm a little jealous. Shouldn't have gone first. You guys are much better on number 2.
I have a question for you guys before we move on. I thought, did we not meet with the Small Business Association, or is that coming up, or am I all mixed up?
We did. Yes. We had a session with them, and we'll likely do a second follow-up session with them to also talk about the goals. All right. So I will do my sharing change again, and we'll move on to the next topic. Thank you, Gurdeep, for that. Excellent. And let's do this. Here we go. And next up is housing with Andrea.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. So I dove into the housing topic and was pretty fortunate because Norfolk has recently done a housing production plan. So you all have done a deep dive into your housing situation pretty recently, and that laid a really good groundwork for looking at housing in the context of the master plan. So we were able to, include a lot of that data, but also take what we heard through phase 1 and the different engagement events that we had to really better understand what the data is telling us. I think a lot of this is probably no surprise to you all, since you all live in Norfolk and know how tough of a housing market we have in our region. But something that we did continue to hear was about the rising housing costs. And a lot of folks noted that this is especially hard for especially seniors with fixed or lower incomes as they get age in place in Norfolk. And then in some of the public comments and conversations we had, also people noted that, it's really hard to move to Norfolk now, harder than it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago, because housing costs have just increased so much. So to be able to afford to move to Norfolk, you need a pretty generous income with today's market. We also know that there are not a lot of rental options in town, and there are low vacancy rates. So it's a really tight and competitive market. We also want to recognize that y'all have had a lot of success with expanding affordable homeownership options. Your Affordable Housing Trust does a lot of good work. Your 40B developments have been able to expand affordable homeownership options for residents, but there's still a disconnect with affordable rental options. And that's something that y'all are working on as you try to increase your homes that are on the subsidized housing inventory. There are also just very few small housing options in town, things like studio apartments or 1-bedroom homes or units. And this, as household sizes change over time, that might be a mismatch. And so people may have trouble finding actually the housing type that they need in town, especially as they maybe downsize or are just a 1 or 2 person household. And then lastly, like Josh mentioned, Norfolk has a lot of unique development constraints, and the limited transportation network means that really you need to make sure that any new housing growth is located strategically. So making sure that as you think about the different housing types that can, go into Norfolk, maybe your more dense options are near the commuter rail station, but that's maybe not going to make as much sense out, in the outskirts where you have more open space and smaller neighborhoods. So thinking about how different housing types will fit into different contexts of town. So we'll go back to the Jamboard. Looks like folks are already active, which is great. So whenever we were thinking about the draft goals for the housing chapter, we really wanted to make sure that we were building on the work that you all did with the housing production plan that has some goals and strategies that you're already working to advance. So we really tried to keep the spirit of those and put them into the context of the master plan, where we're trying to connect housing planning with your land use planning, your economic development planning, environment, all of the other objectives that you're trying to achieve. So the first goal, increasing the share of affordable housing. Like I mentioned, I think your housing production plan and the conversations we had as part of our earlier engagement really show that people are struggling to afford housing. And so the more that you can expand your deed restricted affordable housing share, that means that you can hopefully have more residents who are paying less for housing and can afford to pay for other things that they need in life. Also continuing to expand the types of housing options, but making sure that that's in the context of your existing infrastructure and housing need. Again, just really making sure that you're being strategic and where you're, upzoning, you're doing 3A zoning. That's a strategic upzoning to make sure that you're having housing production where it makes sense. Also, we heard through conversations with especially some of the town staff, it's really important to not just think about, the housing stock, but making sure that you're setting residents up to be in stable housing and having affordability on a spectrum. So while it may not be, that deed restricted affordable housing, subsidized housing, you still want to make sure that you're thinking about how just general housing costs are affecting your existing and future residents. And then lastly, making sure that residential growth accompanies any commercial growth so that that can overall, especially in town center, increase the vibrancy. So I'd love to see already some Post-its on here. Would love to hear if anyone wants to speak to any of these ideas or has any questions. I think that we talked a lot about 40Bs in our work session, and we definitely see us as we are thinking about the goals and then getting into that next level of strategies. How can we help the town continue to have friendly 40Bs that are, happening in the context of the goals that you have through the master plan and other planning processes? And then I see the question, not sure what stability means. That's something that we can think a little differently about how to define that in the master plan. But I think that in the context of where it came up in our conversations was making sure that especially as residents, move into some of those affordable units where they may not have as much income or resources, what kinds of town services or other regional services can the town connect residents to so that they not just have affordable housing, but have all of the supports to make sure that they're feeling stable and having their needs met in Norfolk.
Andrea, I'm wondering if, I don't think you were around for the business district committee conversations. I know Josh was. Might be worth listening to some of those recordings. There was a lot of talk about housing, especially down, the B1 business district is in the business center. Is in the center of Norfolk. So, but there was a lot of conversation about housing. We might be able to pick some stuff out of there. I don't know, it's hours of tape. I don't know if you need to do that. Maybe it'd be better if Josh and I gave you some cheat sheets to it. But anyway, something to think about. There was some conversation about economic development there too, although I think it was more housing, but there's probably more to mine out of it from a housing standpoint than a economic development standpoint.
I texted Eric. He's like, yeah, it sounds like we got about another hour left. I was like, oh, yeah, joke.
That sounds great, Aaron. Thanks. Any other thoughts or questions?
Now that Aaron mentioned it, yeah, if you do go back through those tapes, we also talk a bit about 40R overlay districts. We talk a bit about, trying to act as liaisons between landowners and potential developers to try to sway the conversation to things that the town is looking for as opposed to things that are most profitable for the developer. So yeah, a lot of this was water that was tread 2 or 3 years ago in the B1 conversation.
Yeah, that's great.
I think we did like a combined 80 something hours of talking. So I apologize in advance, but
that's what we love to do as planners is go back and watch old recordings. I've done it a lot. Well, please continue to add any questions or thoughts that you have that we can keep rolling if there isn't anything else that folks want to say at this point.
Great. And if you haven't caught on already, you can advance to the next Jamboard sheet while the topic intro occurs, just to give yourself a little bit of orientation to it. Next up, we've got Adi with transportation.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks, Josh, and everyone who's gone so far. I'm Adi Nochur. I'm a senior transportation planner at MAPC, and I'm going to, like my colleagues before me, just summarize a few key takeaways from our existing conditions in terms of some of the key issues before the town, and then we'll pivot to the Jamboard for another round of goals. And we really appreciate your comments and feedback here. So just a few things to lift up from transportation, and before I get into this, I do again want to reiterate the cross-cutting nature of transportation in terms of its connection to housing and land use and economic development, and the other issues you'll hear about later tonight as well. I think you'll see a number of key themes continue to reemerge and reinforce each other. So at a high level on the transportation front, we've heard that residents desire different ways to get around beyond driving in a personal vehicle. The vast majority of folks in Norfolk do drive, and we do obviously need to respond to that, but not everyone can drive or is able to drive. And so creating those alternatives is going to be really important and has implications on a whole host of issues, whether it's traffic or environmental quality, people's ability to save money and accrue more household income, and of course, public and community health as well when we're thinking about emissions and their impacts. The second bullet here, we think Norfolk has taken a great step in adopting a complete streets policy to accommodate all travel modes and all roadway users, whether folks are walking or biking or taking transit or driving. But there have been challenges to implementation, including probably first and foremost, a lack of funding for sidewalk connections. And this is an issue going back to the 2007 master plan, where one of the goals was to create more sidewalk and biking connections in town. And there's been some progress here, but there's still so much more that needs to be done. And that really came through in the community survey in terms of people wanting that walking and biking access to destinations around town. This third bullet, minimal access to public transportation aside from the commuter rail, really inhibits how people can get around town, especially folks who might be young or elderly or people with lower incomes. The commuter rail is great for getting out of Norfolk, but doesn't really help you get around town. And if you do want to get around town, some of the GATRA transit options are really underutilized. People don't know that they exist. So increasing awareness and utilization of those transit options is going to be a key piece moving forward. And then this last piece about connecting transportation to land use and infrastructure decisions, again, really reinforces the cross-cutting nature of these issues, especially as we think about issues like parking and smart growth zoning. So those are some of our key findings and challenges that we'd like to lift up from the transportation section. And we'll get the Jamboard up in just a minute to talk about some of the goals that come out of that. Okay, and I see folks have already been weighing in with your comments, so this is great. So just under that first sticky note, that pink sticky note there in the top left corner, we want to be responsive to this idea of multimodal connectivity and different ways to get around town. So that's where we get this goal around expanding walking, biking, and rolling connections to town center, to schools, to recreation spaces, and to other key destinations. Another goal that is related to that, as we think about expanding transportation options, is also increasing street safety for all, especially more vulnerable road users, seniors, children, people with disabilities. Safety always comes up when we think about transportation, and so responding to that is always paramount. Then right below that, a similar goal, thinking about how we prioritize funding for street and sidewalk maintenance. There's a huge backlog in Norfolk, and it's not going to be easy to address that, but we do think it's very important to take that challenge head on so that we can create the kind of bike and pedestrian connections that the community wants and deserves. Then continuing in that second column from the top, I mentioned the dependence on driving. How do we sort of decrease that dependence on single occupancy vehicles and increase those transit connections, especially for seniors or other residents who might not be able to drive or might not be able to afford a vehicle, things like that. Below that, we have this emerging best practice, thinking about how we revise zoning and parking ordinances to encourage more neighborhood-oriented, pedestrian-scale businesses. Coming back to some of what Gurdeep shared about economic development, how can we create those more local clusters of activity that people can access by walking or biking potentially. Then this next goal, right below that, we heard loud and clear in the community survey that people really see the commuter rail station as an asset. But also, since the pandemic, the nature of commuter rail usage has changed in Norfolk. Not as many people are driving into town to park and then take the commuter rail into town. That parking utilization has gone down, that commuter rail usage has gone down. But with that said, we still think this is a really important asset to the town. It's important to thinking about how you all are working around MBTA communities in Section 3A. So we definitely want to be attuned to that context and really think about how can we assess that post-pandemic parking demand and commuter rail usage in town center, and how's that inform transit-oriented development strategies in the center to really take advantage of that commuter rail access. And then this last goal is another emerging best practice. We want to make sure that you all are thinking about how you proactively plan for future transportation technologies, whether it's electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, or self-driving cars, should those ever come to fruition, e-bikes, or other technologies. We know that with the takeoff of ride sharing in recent years, that wasn't always something that our communities have proactively planned for. And now oftentimes we're playing catch up and figuring out how to deal with those impacts. So we think the more we can get ahead of the curve on some of these issues, the better off we'll be. So that's why we have that in there as a goal. So again, I appreciate the comments that folks have already started to put in, and I'll step back now, and I'm definitely open to additional comments on the Jamboard, or folks want to unmute yourselves, feel free to chime in. So thanks again for this opportunity to present. And if there are any questions or things that you feel like need clarifying, feel free to shout that out as well. To see some of the comments I see up here, maybe I can respond to a few of those if that would be helpful to folks. I see a comment about paths as a viable transportation option, and I think that definitely is something we'd love to consider. Yeah, we've heard this discussion of sort of secondary multimodal network if you're talking about paths and trails and utility corridors. So the more connections we can make, the better. So definitely don't need to limit ourselves to sidewalks there. I see this comment about a master plan for sidewalk and street maintenance. A phased approach. How do we think about that? I think that's a point that's well taken. I see a point about planning for the reality that single occupancy vehicles are not going away. I think that's fair. But how do we sort of create those alternatives for folks who might not be able to access that and decrease that dependence? So we can definitely move the needle in that direction. Sharing options, I think that's a great comment as well. I don't know if that means bike sharing or scooter sharing or things like that, but that's something we can consider as well. Collaborating with state transportation agencies to encourage economic development in town center, I think that's great as well. And we know that oftentimes on state roads under MassDOT control, those jurisdictional issues often come into play. So that requires careful care and consideration. I know Route 115 and 1A are both state roads, and that comes up in other master plans we worked on in other towns. And a plan for funding design for complete streets projects where construction money is available. That definitely connects back to that goal around prioritizing street and sidewalks maintenance funding, unsafe intersections, again, connecting back to safety. So appreciate you all reflecting these themes here. This is really helpful feedback. Yes, and how can we leverage developers to create some of these infrastructure connections? That's always a hot button topic. So the more we can lean on developers to create some of this and create new resource streams for this, that definitely helps benefit the situation.
Great. I think I'll thank you, Audie, very much for that. I think I'll go ahead and move us along. And thanks for all the additional feedback on that, committee. And let's head back to our next topic. And Courtney's up next with open space, recreation, and sustainability. Courtney, we can't hear your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. Good evening. My name is Courtney Lewis. I'm a senior planner in the land use department at MAPC, and I am overseeing the open space and recreation chapter of the master plan. These key highlights were developed based on information gathered from previous studies, mainly the town's open space and recreation plan, or OSRP, which was most recently updated in 2017. That plan is a guiding document for park and open space system planning on both a local and regional scale. It inventories the community's conservation and recreation resources, provides goals and objectives that create a foundation for the 7-year action plan, which highlights specific actions and strategies to guide future investments, capital projects, and conservation efforts in parks and open spaces. This information was also gathered from the town's municipal vulnerability preparedness report, which looks at and plans for climate change and resiliency, as well as the town's hazard mitigation, or HMP, which on a federal level looks at the town's vulnerabilities to natural hazards. So one of the things that I've learned through those studies, and also feedback from the public, is water supply and water quality are two very critical challenges for the town. The town is threatened by drought and severe storms, which makes the town's drinking water vulnerable to contamination, and, as I mentioned, drought. Invasive plants and insects have also been an issue in more recent years. The town's OSRP noted a need for additional outdoor and indoor recreation facilities, and the town has made progress since completing that plan in 2017. And that's highlighted in some of the more recent projects that have been completed using CPA, or Community Preservation Act funds, to both acquire land and make improvements to parks and open spaces. Another goal from that previous plan was to increase recreational and social activities for youth in particular in the town, and also make improvements in terms of accessibility to the town's existing parks and open spaces. Oh.
Did we lose Courtney? Courtney, you still there? Wow. So on the screen now, we've got shared the open space recreation sustainability initial goals, which Courtney was turning to next. In building off those challenges that Courtney was describing. So we have improve and expand park and open space access for all residents, provide high quality parks, open spaces, recreation facilities, amenities, and programs that serve all residents. Protect and enhance Norfolk's natural resources and environmental systems, relating to those water quality challenges that Courtney mentioned and over the long term. Highlight and protect Norfolk's unique historic, social, and cultural assets, which will relate to the historical and cultural resources topic in the next section. And then ensure adequate resources, staff, and funding are available for maintaining Norfolk's parks, open spaces, and recreation facilities, and leverage existing and new open space and conservation areas to advance resiliency goals as climate change presents more challenges in the future years. So we invite your questions about these initial goals and or new goal suggestions if there are some gaps potentially that you see in this area, or you can shout it out and give us your comments verbally.
Josh, I'm gonna chime in on the Talk to Pond Street Planning Committee. It's just they, as a committee in town, are doing exactly this right now. So they might have a wealth of current and very specific knowledge that could help this this board.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we'll make sure to touch base with them. Are they a subcommittee to anyone, or are they their own committee?
I believe they are no, they're I don't know. I think they're a subcommittee to the planning board. I don't, maybe one of the other folks on the board here could answer that question. Or maybe they're a subcommittee to the recreations committee, actually, now that I say that. Does Rich know, or do we lose Rich?
No, I think you're right, Aaron. They are kind of an offshoot of the Park and Recreation Commission.
Yeah.
Although I will say, just to plug in, that the Park and Rec and the Conservation Commission will be shortly embarking on an update to the 2017 Open Space Recreation Plan. So we want to support them in their efforts.
Mm-hmm. Courtney, welcome back. If you can hear us now, we've gone through the initial goals and are just getting the feedback on them now.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I apologize. My computer died on me. But yes, the goals are improve and expand park and open space access for all. This means to the extent possible, reducing physical barriers so that everyone, regardless of age and ability, has equal access to parks and open space. The goal also speaks to equitable distribution of park and recreation facilities. The second goal, provide high quality parks, open spaces, recreation facilities, amenities, and programs that serve all residents. So this is taking a holistic approach to the town's park and open space system, including maintenance and upkeep of existing facility, as well as expanding the town's park system when opportunities present themselves, and expanding programming and activities for different segments of the community, of the population. Goal 3, protect and enhance Norfolk's natural resources and environmental systems. So ensuring that the environmental and ecological health of the town remains sound, looking at water quality, soil erosion, and runoff, as well as invasive species and conservation of sensitive environmental areas and wildlife habitat. Goal 4 is highlight and protect the town's unique historic, social, and cultural resources. resources. The town's geography and landscape have played a huge part in the town's history and culture. And so ensuring that those things are highlighted and celebrated, and strengthening people's ties to the land itself. And then the final goal is ensuring that ensure adequate resources, staffing, and funding are available for maintaining these facilities. So just looking for opportunities for grant funding and additional funding sources, and ensuring that the town has adequate staff, both for maintenance and upkeep, as well as overseeing programming for things offered through the Recreation Commission.
Great. Thank you, Courtney, for that. And thank you, committee. Courtney, when you were absent, I think the committee gave us a fair amount of Post-its as well. So we can take a look at those. And I think we're going to move along to the next one. So thank you for the efforts on that. And next, sorry, let me do my sharing swap. And next we've got Lindsay with the historical and cultural resources. And I noticed that a few of you have joined recently, so we'll post the link to the Jamboard back into the chat just in case you can't see the previous chatting. And
hi, everyone. Thank you for having us tonight. I'm Lindsay Randall. I'm on our arts and culture team. I'm the regional humanities specialist, and I am sort of managing the historic resources section of this chapter. And I'm joined by my colleague, Abby Judd, who is one of our arts and culture planners, and she's managing the sort of cultural resources section. So she and I are tag teaming this work for Norfolk. So in terms of the historical resources, I just want to first start off by saying that in all my background research, it is very clear that your community, particularly your historical commission, has put a tremendous effort in to preserve and uplift Norfolk's historical resources and heritage. And based on the community surveys, there is a strong interest in the community in not only continuing these efforts, but actually expanding them. And one of the main challenges that has come up is that Norfolk faces in terms of historical resources is that there is not a comprehensive approach guiding historic preservation efforts in the town. And this has meant that decisions related to historic preservation in the town have been varied case to case. And you can see that the community has felt that in a lot of the feedback that we received, particularly around the concern that the history that is being stewarded in the town is not as diverse as actually exists in Norfolk, and the concern that there actually has not been as many resources and funding funneled towards historic preservation projects. Another thing that kept coming up is the importance to the community for maintaining semi-rural New England character of Norfolk, while also embracing actually climate resilient strategies. And there are ways, and you'll see this on my Jamboard, of embedding historical considerations into these efforts and more efforts to across other elements of the plan, such as open space and just other town-wide efforts in general past the master plan. And so it's my hope that we can lay the groundwork for seeing how historic preservation considerations can uplift other work of the master plan and the town in general. And it's not that it's just a standalone issue. And in terms of the cultural resources, there are many parallels between cultural resources and other elements of the plan, including public health or community health, as we're now calling it, and open space and economic development. So one of the primary challenges that was highlighted through engagement has been the lack of social places for people to gather in Norfolk. And this is particularly challenging for youth in town, noting there are very few places for them to hang out outside of school. And through both the survey and public forum, we heard that there is a desire for more places to gather with a particular interest in the town center. And simultaneously, we also heard that people would like to see greater use of existing town facilities, which could include the library as a site for gathering. There also seems to be a strong desire for more commercial development in the town center, particularly for restaurants to meet local demand. And all efforts to activate any facilities, it is also important to consider pedestrian and bicycle access that has also been named as a challenge, as we've seen. In addition to sort of the finding spaces to gather, many community members also spoke to the importance of community events in Norfolk, such as the Little League Parade. And youth sports and recreation are key aspects of community life in town, and there are opportunities for additional events and programming to activate facilities and community spaces. And existing programs are currently being led by a variety of groups in town through providing support to sustain and expand cultural events. We can strengthen the quality of life, social cohesion, and the sense of community in town. And one more issue for the town is the lack of formal integration of arts and culture opportunities into project planning, and recognizing that there's room for enhanced coordination and internal support, particularly as it overlaps with creative businesses that align with the desire for a vibrant town center. So that's our little bit. So I think we can go to our Jam board. And so these are the ones that we had really focused on, again, trying to make this really manageable for everyone. So through the community feedback for the historical resources, we had strengthening and understanding documentation of historic resources and narratives. So it's not just documenting this stuff, but also making sure the community is aware of this history. Prioritize funding and increase resources for historical preservation and other related activities such as heritage tourism. Preserve and protect Norfolk's rich historical heritage, particularly as we think of development in the town. And sustain and expand community and cultural events. Oh, sorry, that's for the cultural one. And then for existing conditions, promote more alignment between preservation efforts and town-led efforts. And then use historical landscapes such as for mitigation for flooding and other climate resiliency efforts. And then for the cultural, we had the sustain and expand community and cultural events, such as Norfolk Community Day, events at Town Hill, etc. Expand town resources to support arts and culture and businesses. Coordinate more opportunities to highlight the regional arts and cultural resources, and integrate arts and culture opportunities into public space development and planning. So that is what Abby and I came up with. And we're happy to answer questions, new goals. QR code tours. I will say there is a really lovely walking tour that you guys have for downtown.
What's the, can you add some context for the use historical landscapes as mitigation for flooding? Like what sort of historical landscapes would you use for mitigation for flooding?
So especially if you think like an open space and everywhere, and returning it to what we call like pre-contact landscapes or native plants. So if it is an area of like open space that typically is flooding and causing issues, you might actually return it to maybe a more marsh-like landscape with cattails and things like that, that will help retain the water instead of letting it sort of flow into buildings or culvert or wherever that you don't want it.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And this is something too that I've seen being done up in places like Strawberry Bank Museum up in New Hampshire. Like a lot of places are relooking at native plants and what we are terming pre-contact landscapes, knowing after contact it is never fully pre-contact again, but sort of using those strategies.
All right. Looks like Lindsay and Abby have got the group pondering, but looks, I think, very good overall. So thank you very much. And if maybe we'll go ahead and move us along, but if the committee has additional thoughts as this becomes more familiar with you, please do pass them along to Lindsay and Abby and we'll take a look. You can do that through vis-a-vis us, Andrea and myself, and we'll distribute to the team for any of the topics. Thank you, Lindsay and Abby, for that. Lindsay, thank you for presenting. Let me switch the share again, quick. We're getting there, team. We just have a few topics left. This has been very productive so far, so we appreciate everyone's efforts and persistence. Next, we have Sarai and Community Health.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarai Valletta, and I'm a public health planner at MAPC. And I will be talking about community health in the town. So from our findings and from the public health data available, we noticed that the town, residents in town experience slightly higher health outcomes than other communities in Massachusetts. However, there are some riskier behaviors that residents tend to participate in a little more. Those include behaviors like smoking, binge drinking, and less physical activity. The Norfolk Board of Health and the Metacomet Public Health Alliance are two of the entities that really work to address issues related to environmental and community health in the community. However, we do know that there are limited medical facilities, which showed up as a concern for the overall community health and health outcomes. And also from the research, we noticed that youth and elderly populations face additional challenges. It's not, it's hard to know exactly because public health data at the town level is very limited. However, we did hear from some elderly concerns around mobility issues, getting just walking around, getting to places like their appointments, noting that options like the ride don't go to Norfolk. And from the youth side, there were concerns more around mental health and also social activities and the lack of those to engage in sort of more of a social life for youth. So we can go to the Jamboard with the goals. So some of our goals, well, I think the existing conditions and community feedback, some of the goals overlap, but sort of kind of divide them the way I did, because that's where I saw them first. But in terms of best practices, one of the goals is to increase basically local health data. And that's just to better understand the needs in the community. And there could be opportunities to do that in a lot of different ways, but really leaning on the regional support. And so one of the other goals in the bottom there is really expanding the Board of Health capacity through regional collaboration and other partnerships, and strengthening the relationship with the Metacommon Public Health Alliance. Another goal is to improve infrastructure to increase safe, walkable, and connected routes, which will also expand the opportunity for active and passive recreation, with the overall goal of increasing activity that is stimulating to the body and mind. Next goal is to support overall improvements to address physical, mental, and social health, with a focus on the needs of youth and seniors, as I discussed before. These are groups that we know face unique needs. Next goal is to increase opportunities for social engagement and community connectedness. This kind of relates to some of the other areas like economic development and cultural engagement, and also just transportation. So this kind of really, there was a lot of comments from the community about wanting to just walk downtown, wanting to go to events downtown, wanting to feel more connected to each other and also to their community. The next goal is to sustain and expand access to local food. We know that the town has a history of agriculture, and some of that is still ongoing. There was even a comment thinking about community gardens, so thinking about expanding some of that access. And then water issues is something that we've heard before, but from the health perspective is really identify and remediate the sources of pollution that degrade water quality and impact people's health. I'm just looking at the comments. Adult classes is part of recreation. That's a good one. Thank you for that. And yeah, those are just things when we think of healthy community. It's not just like physical activity, but things to engage and think of intellectual health, think of being connected with folks. So these are all things that we try to think of when we're thinking of community health. So just to answer one of those questions, in Boston, there are outdoor group exercise classes. Are those privately run and allowed to operate on city land? So I think that might be a mix. I know in my city, there's similar things. And so I think sometimes they are sponsored by the city. And so they're free for everyone. And sometimes they're just outdoor classes that are more privately operated. But that's something that we could consider in terms of community connectedness and social engagement. Yeah, and just the other comment is thinking of what towns are doing to build community. And I'll have to look into that old community rec hall. Thanks for your comments, and feel free to keep adding questions or new goal ideas.
Great. Thank you, Sarai. And this is turning toward our final comments. So thank you all. We've covered a lot of ground this evening. We will recirculate these goals in the slide deck to the committee so that you can have them at hand and think about them as you might in your free time. So let's move along to the last section here, which is Brian with our community facilities and services. And I'll get the presentation up for you, Brian.
Awesome. All right. Well, last but not least, glad everyone's still here and attentive. Maybe we stretch a little bit and get ready. So just to recap a little bit, for this section, we're evaluating and providing recommendations for town staff about town services, how to ensure the sustainability and financial sustainability of those services, enhance service level, and et cetera. But we're also looking at the public processes and decision-making and how well Norfolk produces resident-friendly communication and really engages the public when it's appropriate. And so while some of this information's very relevant, it was also collected from the town website and a lot of publicly available sources. But however, that does not mean every resident knows how to find this information and use it. And so with that, looking at some of the key points we pulled out, looking at town meeting attendance is a good indicator of how engaged the public is. And looking at this as 2% seems really low. It's actually, comparing to other communities of similar size and characteristics, not as low as you might think. And then looking at town finances, those have been really good in terms of a few key indicators that we've looked at, but obviously there's always room for improvement when it comes to engaging with the public. Accessibility of town information and physical access to facilities, something that the town has identified. I think it's important to reiterate that here. And then when in terms of demand for new enhanced services, those are going to cost money. Those things we need to evaluate and prepare for. And then, going over the draft goals, I'll wait till Josh gets them up. We drafted these with in mind of keeping, identifying some of the many positive things that the town has recently changed or is currently doing. But obviously, we want to make sure that we continue that improvement and, provide a higher level of service. So just in no particular order, probably just going left to right. So continuing to refine and professionalize the town's capital improvement plan and budget process. So I think, if for those that aren't aware, in the last couple of years, the town's capital improvement plan, enhanced by a software provider, has really improved in terms of having information accessible to residents and kind of giving a lot of context, overall budget, funding sources for those types of things. But we still think there's improvements to be made to that process. In terms of informing the decisions that are made, not just providing the context for those decisions, but then also in terms of the financial process, linking outcomes to those numbers, which are now segmented into like the annual report and into like the budget process, the budget, spreadsheets. We've also got a couple of other existing conditions and data related suggestions and goals, which are related to increasing availability or giving public access to the interdecision-making process and informing those decisions. So in terms of like making town facilities and the policy that drives those decisions more accessible to the public. Like, for example, the town has published a lot of fleet data and has key indicators and has provided public information of like how old those existing assets are, but there's no real information of how they go about making decisions. And so we all know it's important to maintain your fleet, but posting and making that methodology public would be something that enhances that service as well. Based on community feedback, we've heard that, obviously one of the key cogs of public processes and decision-making is Norfolk boards and committees. Make sure we increase the efficiency and effectiveness by making sure communication between those is effective. And then looking at best and emerging practices from, not even just neighboring towns, but, nationwide. like preparing for challenges in the municipal labor market and rising costs of services. As we've seen the price of not just, the scarcity of labor in the municipal field, but also the cost of labor is rapidly increasing. And then, that also trickles down to the cost of services, whether that's internal services or external services. So making sure we prepare for that effectively. And then, we've mentioned before that we've kind of taken resiliency, like energy sustainability subject matter, and obviously adapted it and fit this in that category. And I think it's a natural fit because there's plenty of opportunities to identify with public facilities to leverage and create green energy infrastructure, and then prioritizing investments that reduce the town's carbon footprint is an important goal. But just stopping there. I know it's late, but I'm open to questions, suggestions. So just push through one last round of feedback. But I'll take it. There's no post-its there that I just did everything perfectly, and no one has any suggestions.
Like, I have to assume that preparing for challenges in the municipal labor market and rising costs of services is part of, whoever the director level positions in town hall are, right? Because I know it's a conversation with like Justin at certain times during the year, and that the school committees talked about understanding what their rising costs are. And I think DPW has a pretty good outlay of the next 5 years of rising costs. So I'm not sure how much more we can do to prepare for that.
Yeah, I think in terms of the municipal labor market, we don't have the exact data for Norfolk to say that this is the average age of municipal employee, but looking at nationwide trends and especially local trends, you can see that the average age is much higher than the typical labor pool. And so, there's strategies and processes you can implement to kind of make these jobs more attractive and kind of improve the pathway to municipal government for the younger generations, and trying to get people more exposed into this work. So there's plenty of things we can do there. But then, in terms of the rising costs of services, it really does. It's really, just preparing for trends. As we know, Proposition 2.5 locks in the amount that you can raise in revenue. And a lot of the costs that municipalities incur is drastically outpacing that 2.5%. And so I think, it calls to administration to think creatively about cost effectiveness, but also, preparing for, steps and increases and ways to shift costs, maybe to like the capital plan or other sources to kind of improve the effectiveness of those investments, basically.
The one other thing I'll mention is the community feedback sticky here, encourage more frequent collaboration across Norfolk boards and committees. I think that's really cool. I also think if there were a novel or efficient way to help the residents better understand what these boards are doing and what collaboration already exists. Because I've definitely heard this, right? I've heard this from a lot of people, both in my capacity as various board member across town and also just a resident. It's like, oh no, this group is working with this board and this committee is working with this group, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of hard to lay that out because it's hard to lay that out for, Joe Sixpack living in town, because sometimes they're not even familiar with all the boards and committees that exist, and they're definitely not familiar with what kind of collaboration exists, because it's not real unless you sit and watch the recordings, and some of these boards and committees don't have recordings, they just have minutes. It's kind of hard to keep pace for that. So I'm wondering like how that could be solved. Just not that there's an answer tonight, but I'd be interested to to identify some ways there.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, municipal government doesn't do a great job of telling a story. And a lot of times when people interact with municipal government, it's because of an issue that they feel passionately about. So I think making that communication more proactive and getting the word out for like how the boards and committees work, the work that they're up to, and then even at the service level too. There's definitely improvements that can be made, not just in Norfolk, but across the, all municipalities, but definitely ones that we can look at in terms of Norfolk, ways that would enhance effectiveness of communication.
Yeah, and I know the town administrator's office is kicking off a newsletter. So maybe that's already scheduled to be part of it, or maybe that's potential for future newsletters to have more of a, hey, here's this board and here's what they're doing and here's what they're working on. That might be helpful.
Yep. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you to the entire MAPC team for the presentations this evening around the topic goals. Hopefully, committee members, you feel the same. I mean, it's hard to feel a sense of excitement at the end of an evening like this, but I think that there is a sense of excitement and confidence that we feel as a team in turning the corner from phase one to now poking into phase two. And I think the breadth and depth of the draft goals, which we've shared with you, give us that sense and feeling. Of course, we will continue to frame these as initial draft, working draft goals. The foundation that we presented this evening really is an instrument of further engagement that we will be doing, as we've described in the previous presentation, both broadly to the community in general, but then also focused on some key committees, boards, and commissions. So this is the start of this next phase. Please do, as you have thoughts over the coming weeks, do drop it in an email or return back to these jam boards. We'll send all of this information back out to you in a clean email so you've got it and can respond as needed. And we'll also send out in another clean email the existing conditions brief document as well. So any other final parting thoughts, questions, or comments as we conclude?
I'll just mention the enthusiasm for me is to see all this stuff kind of boiled down and focused, because for looking at the names in the call now, many of which have reached out independently to try to garner feedback from the residents, and you just come back disgruntled, like they just want sidewalks and grocery stores, but it's actually more than that, right? Like there's actually root cause reason why they're saying those things, and this kind of gets to a more town-wide understanding of like the things they actually want out of it. To shop, but they want a place to go in town to do their shopping or to do business or to meet other people, and only good things can come out of this, I think.
Well said, Gary. Well, if there's no additional comments, I just want to say thank you, Josh, and the entire MAPC team. We really appreciate you putting this together and presenting everything this evening. This was wonderful, and look forward to seeing the update to this. Like you said, I think a couple action items for you is that you're going to send this out to everybody on the list. I think there was a few that missed. And then I think we all have some homework. We all need to get the responses into you by October 6th, I think you said. Yeah. So looking forward to getting this all compiled and moving on to the next step.
Thank you all very much.
Yep. Well, unless there's any other final comments, this will conclude our special meeting this evening for the Master Plan Steering Committee. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, and I don't know if John had mentioned this, but I know that for the ice cream part of the business, it changes over at 11 a.m. I think.
Okay. Yeah, I did say that.
And it stays kind of. There's like two segments, so there's a morning day part, and then there's that afternoon. So the ice cream stuff doesn't show up until I believe 11 a.m. So it's really kind of all Dunkin' on both sides, and then on the right side, I think it changes just to the basket on the top part. But that's it. There's nothing changing every hour.
Okay. As far as like location of the canopy and proximity to the displays,